Welcome everybody into another edition of Warm Weather Fans, the Sunbelt podcast. My name is Brian Stone, joined this week by Zeke Palermo. Maybe one day we'll get all three people back on the show at the exact same time. As of right now, I'm not 100% sure when that would be. But Zeke, how are you doing? How's it going?
Good. I'm well. We are transitioning in Georgia. We're transitioning out of high school football season into basketball, which has kind of created an odd dichotomy in my life because in my work and my day to day, I'm focusing a lot on basketball, wrestling, swim. But like, we're still in the middle of the NFL season. We're still in the middle of the NCAA season, which has been good for me because I'm able to separate work and pleasure a little bit. But that's been what's going on. I didn't watch last week's episode. I've determined that I have difficulty watching the episodes I'm not on because I want to chime in. It's conversations that I'm typically privy to, and I hear you guys talking and you're making good points, but there's things I want to say, and I'm just in my car and I can't say them.
There's a pretty prominent fantasy football podcast I listen to. The Ringer actually puts it on, and they refer to people who listen as ghosts, because someone one time said the closest thing you could get to being a ghost is listening to two people have a discussion about something they have no clue about, and you're just screaming at the top of your lungs, actually it's this, and they're just like, I don't know, I guess we'll just have to go without figuring that out. And
But
so
that's not the case for us.
no.
Not to jump your gun, but if you're watching on Twitter, hop over to YouTube, youtube.com/@warmweatherfans, as you can see on the screen, and you can join our conversation. You can scream at us, and maybe we'll listen, maybe we won't. Depends on if you're stupid or not.
All right. Well, that's a hell of a way to start off the show this week. Yeah, so there were a lot of interesting, I want to say, results in the Sun Belt, and I'm gonna say this. You guys gave me crap because I missed the episode after Georgia Southern lost to Old Dominion. Matt's not beating the Louisiana just lost to South Alabama allegations. I'm just gonna put that out there right now, because to Inside Baseball, he messaged us like 15 minutes before we were supposed to record and was like, actually I can't be there. And I'm like, interesting. We'll see how that goes. All right, so let's start off with Saturday's slate. Didn't have a Thursday night game this week, so that was a refreshing change. I can actually remember all of the things that happened that got stuffed down under the like NFL games that I watched the day after. This will be a quick one. So Auburn defeats ULM just to start 48-14. Me and Matt litigated this, and we've talked about it. You and I, and you and Matt and I have talked about Aiden Armenta is just not. He's not it at the quarterback position. It's going to be difficult for them to do kind of anything of note with him back there, because it limits. They have, Ahmad Hardy in this running game, and when the defense is when the offense is playing complementary football to the defense, it looks great. But Armenta, like, there's just no consistency throwing the football. He kind of struggles with like easy throws. He'll make a couple of tough ones, but not enough to say, hey, this guy is definitively kind of the answer for us at the quarterback spot. So, and I mean, frankly, they were just kind of outclassed by Auburn. I mean, Auburn had been really struggling, and I had been kind of joking in weeks past about how they were going to get upset against ULM. Well, when Cam Coleman, the freshman at receiver for Auburn, comes in and catches 3 touchdown passes, and your quarterback, Peyton Thorne, goes 22 of 32 for 286 and 5 scores with no turnovers, like, yeah, that's going to help, obviously.
Yeah. Auburn, for what it's worth, on the Auburn side, they found a quarterback in Peyton Thorne. He's been pretty solid over the past several weeks. 5 touchdowns in a game is absurd. And to your point about Armenta, he was so bad that a guy that I thought we were maybe never going to see play again, we saw General Booty get some snaps at the end of the game there. ULM is in the same tailspin that Texas State is in right now and experienced last season, where all of the sudden this team is good, and this team that was previously in the bottom of the conference is stringing together wins in the beginning of the year. And then all of a sudden, like ULM, all of a sudden is on a 4-game slide after looking at early on to be the favorite out of the West. And if they were second, it was to Louisiana by only a small margin. This trend, I feel confident in chalking up to teams that were previously underperforming. Just don't have film on them, don't know what these coaches are going to do, don't know what Brian Vincent is going to do at ULM, for example, or the year before GJ Kinney at Texas State. I think we're kind of figuring out where ULM sits. They like to play like Troy has in several years, but they're not quite at the personnel level to do that. They don't have a guy like Carlton Martial, who's the NCAA all-time tackle leader. They don't have a guy like Javon Solomon, who's perpetually in the opposing backfield. So I think ULM, and granted, you have to consider what my thoughts about Texas State were at the beginning of the year. ULM is in a similar situation to where Texas State was around this time last year, where you can see they're on the up and up. They overperformed in the early season, and once they get the correct personnel, it might start to come together. Again, granted, Texas State got Jordan McLeod, and we're still unsatisfied with their performance given their personnel. But the reminder: this is an SEC Auburn team. No matter how poor of an SEC team they are, there is that discrepancy that ULM had to make up. I don't know. They were always going to lose this one, no matter how hot they were coming into this. So not much to say.
I think ULM's backslide this season has been a little bit more palatable just because there were two main reasons why it kind of went the way it went. Number one, I think we identified very early on, even before they really started kind of racking up wins and beating, like JMU and teams like that. I think we kind of all saw and mentioned multiple times this Arminta at quarterback thing isn't sustainable. You can't go every single week and have your quarterback be 11 of 16 for 112 yards and win every single week. There are just going to be weeks you're going to run into defenses that are not going to allow you to run the ball. And I think the other thing too is, the thing with Texas State and what makes it so baffling to me is that it's not the way they lose, it's the week to week just inconsistency. Sure. 1 week they'll just smash a team and you'll be like, okay, so are they back? And then the next week they lose and you're like, no, they're not back. So the thing with ULM is they started hot and they've just kind of gradually went downhill, but all of it is very understandable as to why it kind of happened the way it happened. So I mean, again, I don't have the stats right in front of me. General Booty came in and threw a 50-yard touchdown with his only pass attempt, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was 1 for 1 for 65.
Okay. I think you have to make him the starting quarterback. I think you've seen enough of the Arminta stuff, and he holds this offense back. And I don't know what it could be with Booty. I'm not Brian Vincent. I'm not seeing him in practice every day. So maybe there's something there that's preventing him from being the full-time starting quarterback. But now what you have in Arminta, and I don't know how you can keep in good faith rolling him out every single week and just being like, the results are going to be different this time, but there's no real reason why as to that would be. So you can only do that so many weeks in a row.
How much of that is you projecting your own quarterback frustrations at Georgia Southern?
I think it goes for any quarterback that's just there's no juice.
Sure.
I was going through. So another example of this was, Valaire. at
Mhm.
Georgia State. How many weeks can you watch him throw multiple interceptions before you're just like, let's see what else we have? Like
Right.
it can't be worse than this. And like, yeah, Georgia Southern falls 100% into the same bucket and has since the beginning of last season. But I just don't understand these coaches being like, I'm gonna beat my head against a wall because it feels so good when I stop. And it's like, well, then what are we doing? Like, what
Mhm.
are you trying to win games? Are you trying to like prove a point? And so that's where you lose me, is when you're like, I'm gonna be stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. I don't really have a reason to do it. And then you get like the Charles Huffs of the world who they are willing to change, but it literally takes almost like an act of God in
Mhm.
order for them to be like, maybe Stone Earl shouldn't be starting our games. You know, it took a 5 minute 21-point comeback for him to decide, hey, maybe Braylon Braxton's actually the right way to go.
Mhm.
So I, I just don't get it. Like, how many below kind of average performances can a quarterback turn in consecutive weeks before we're like, just try something else? Like, it's not working. So
That's a question I don't have the answer to.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. And you know, UL Monroe was getting shut out 24-0 at half. I mean, it was pretty much over at that point. They scored two kind of garbage time touchdowns. They weren't really in contention to win this game, but you know, like I said, I think you keep starting Armenta every week and you're putting a concrete ceiling on this team, and you're preventing yourself from making a bowl game, which you're very much on the precipice of. And
Mhm.
now looks like more of an uphill battle unless you beat. I don't remember who they play this week, but or if they're off or whatever. But you know, one of those teams is Louisiana, and they can't really afford to lose another time. So you
They get
might be getting their
Arkansas
absolute.
State. They get Arkansas
Okay.
State before the season is over.
Well, even that now doesn't look like
Right.
that's not a layup. A couple weeks ago, we would have probably favored ULM, but the way that they've played as of late, I don't know how you could do that.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, so Auburn improves. Wow, this is depressing. Improves to 4-6. Wow, great guys. Hugh Freeze has saved the program. UL Monroe falls to 5-5 with the loss. Getting into the next one here. So Marshall defeats Coastal Carolina. Um, Marshall, they had a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. They were kind of generating offense and stuff in like starts and fits. Like, it was inconsistent.
Mhm.
I think one part of that was apparently AJ Turner was not only not playing, but wasn't even on the sideline, people said, for this game, which, who knows what that means for them, because frankly, he's been their kind of break glass in case of
Mhm.
emergency offense type player. And if he's out for like an extended period of time, like, that's going to be a real issue for them, because frankly, the Jordan Houston, Ethan Payne, like, just don't really have the bring the same level of like explosiveness to the table. So we'll see how that all pans out. But I thought this was a good win for Marshall. They face another Sun Belt East team. I've said for weeks now, I still think that they're the second best team in the conference, and behind Louisiana, and I still feel that way. So
Mhm.
it was a good statement win for them to kind of put their foot out there.
I I struggle to say that they're the second best team in the conference, only because it's quite a gap, right? You'd expect, especially in a conference like the Sun Belt where there are divisions, you kind of expect a 1A, 1B in each conference, but the gap between UL and Marshall is so great that it makes me uneasy to call Marshall. What I am very comfortable saying is that they're the most consistent team, or the second most consistent team in the Sun Belt. Their only loss came in that I would call it maybe a fluke. I don't know really what
It
word
was
you
a
would
fluke.
fluke.
It was a fluke.
Right, the fluke loss to Southern. And like outside of that, they're winning their conference games fairly comfortably. After obviously this loss, they've only played one possession conference game. Braylon Braxton is the key here, but I'm again cautious to award much credit to Marshall, considering just how poorly Coastal played here. They turned the ball over 4 times. I believe it was 4 times.
3.
3.
Yep.
Had opportunities late in this game to at least bring it closer. Had several, medium to long drives late in the game that ended on 4th downs. I mean, without AJ Turner, Marshall's run game is abysmal, which is a little shocking. I kind of expected Braylon Braxton, in the absence of AJ Turner, to take a larger role and kind of put on like the Colton Joseph type cape, where he is obviously passing for 200 some odd yards, but then also just leading the team with 80 some odd rushing. So that was a shock. I think most interesting to me is just how dysfunctional Coastal's offense appears to be. They cannot seem to string together 2 good offensive games, let alone 2 good offensive drives. They've been very reluctant to turn to Noah Kim. They've been a little better under him, but it wasn't such a great discrepancy with Noah Kim as opposed to Ethan Vasco that it really constituted a change. Unlike, for example, the Stone Earl Braylon Braxton change where it was so stark. You could reasonably stick with Vasco. I think this is similar to Louisiana Monroe. Offensively, they're being held back by their quarterback and almost exclusively their quarterback, because Coastal for several years has had some of the best weapons in the conference, receiving wise, and always seems to have 1 or 2 very talented backs. But Ethan Vasco is simply not of the caliber that a team with the aspirations such as Coastal's needs to be at. Because we have to frame our Sunbelt conversations within the context of at the end of the day, this is the Sunbelt. This is not the SEC. This is not the Big Ten. But Coastal, based on their recent success, has a very high bar, much like App does, although App's standard is, extends back to its FCS days. Same thing with Southern. Southern has a expectation of excellence, albeit it extends back to the FCS days and not necessarily the FBS days. This is not an Old Dominion vibe Coastal team. This is not a Georgia State vibe Coastal team. This isn't a Texas State vibe Coastal team where 6 wins, 7 wins is acceptable. This is a team that has built a reputation of being among the best in the conference. Maybe that's just all clouded by those Grayson McCall years, Jamie Chadwell years, and it's a recency bias. But through 2 years, as we're coming to the conclusion of 2 years of Tim Beck, it feels like a disappointing hire. That has just kind of been my takeaway, is that maybe he was not the right guy for the job. You've talked a lot about where guys come from and how, that may not have been the best hire just based on background. What do you think of Tim Beck? As we still have 2 weeks, but as we enter these final.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was waiting. I didn't know if that was the end of the sentence or not.
No, I looked like you were ready to jump in, so I just kind of trailed off. My bad.
Well, I am. I mean, I will say, I think I said, people can go back and listen to this. All of our podcasts are available on Apple and Spotify. Not all the video is available. That just started this year, but I believe at the beginning of last season, when we were doing the Sunbelt previews and Coastal came up, I said before last season, I didn't think last season was going to be an accurate representation of Tim Beck as a head coach, because he had presumably 1 year of Grayson McCall just fall kind of into his lap.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when you just award a new head coach the best quarterback in the conference, presumably heading into the season, you're like, unless this guy's a total disaster, there's no way he's going to win fewer than like 7
Mm-hmm.
games. And I think they finished 8-4 when it was all said and done. And I will give him credit. He did make Vasco toward the end of last season actually look like somewhat of a competent starter, which now we know to not be the case. So I think this season is a more accurate representation of his ability as a head coach. And I think one of the big complaints that I had about him when he was hired was he came from NC State as the offensive coordinator. Has NC State ever run an exciting offense? Has anyone ever
Mm-hmm.
been thrilled, been like, man, you got to tune in on Saturdays to watch NC State play? Like, I've never felt that way in my lifetime. Like, even, I was at the Southern NC State game in 2014 when Jacoby Brissett was the quarterback at NC State. Like, actually, you know what? I take that back. When Russell Wilson was at NC State, they were a must-watch team. Other than
Mm-hmm.
that, and maybe Phillip Rivers. But, like, other than that, it's been, like, I don't know. I've watched some of the Mike Glennon games. I watched the Jacoby Brissett games. They've all had Dave Doran as the head coach, and it kind of all looks the same to me, and I'm not really jazzed about any of it. So if I was a Coastal fan coming in and they announced that NC State's OC was going to be my head coach, I would have been like, yeah, no thanks, dude. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of played out that way where they don't really have a quarterback like you talked about. Vasco and Kim, they seem to be interchangeable. Like, although I would have liked to have seen more from Noah Kim than I have. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
thought he played kind of well in the Louisiana game, all things considered. But I mean, this game was like a perfect example of they start really hot. Braden Bennett, they get a 4-minute drive to start the game. They march down the field, 9 plays, 75 yards. Braden Bennett cashes it in from 4 yards out, and they didn't score again until 13 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter. Like, you can't do anything with that. When you're turning the ball over and you're losing the turnover margin 3-0 like they did in this game, and your quarterback is super shaky, and defensively Marshall was giving Coastal a lot of issues. There's just what can you build off of? Like, we need to find a brand new quarterback. Okay, so does 2/3 of the conference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And what are we going to do? We're going to run the spread like everybody else does. Okay, are we going to throw any new wrinkles in? No, not really. And so you're just kind of left with, like, I think the further removed we get from it, we're going to find that the Jamie Chadwell, Grayson McCall thing was more of lightning in a bottle that you're not
Mm-hmm.
really going to recapture. And so Marshall, just to be frank, has better players. They have a better defense than Coastal does. Their quarterback doesn't go from being like a disaster to serviceable to back to unplayable from week to week basis. Like, Braxton has been fairly like even keeled across the board. So I mean, I watched this game up until when Marshall scored in the third quarter to make it 24-7, and then I just kind of flipped another game on and was like, this one's a wrap. A lot of Vasco's yardage came in garbage time when they were down like multiple scores.
Right.
So I was just like, yeah, this is what you've come to expect from Coastal. They're a 5-5 team. They play like a 5-5 team. They're totally average, which is fine, but that's not. A lot of Coastal fans have to be frustrated because that's not what they've come to expect, having watched the Jamie Chadwell years. So that's just kind of my piece on it. Do you have any last minute notes before we move off of this game? There was a lot of talk about that game, but it was a good win. It was a good win for Marshall. I think they kind of staked their claim as being like, hey, like you said, consistently we're one of the best teams in the conference. Again, the one loss now, you're just kind of like, I think we can write that off. Like, they finally made the right choice at quarterback, and it's paying dividends. All right, so Marshall is now 7-3 and 5-1 in the Sun Belt. Coastal drops to 5-5 and is now 2-4 in the conference. Let's talk about Georgia Southern and Troy. I tweeted this. I'm sorry for anybody who follows me and doesn't want me to hear me repeat myself, things I've tweeted. I tweeted this on Saturday night. The best thing about doubting Clay Helton is you're never wrong, you're just early. And that's the way I feel about it is like, I expected them to crumble last week when they played at South Alabama, and it was just off by a week. That was it. So, and we'll talk about this when we get into Coastal Georgia Southern this upcoming weekend, but I think this is the beginning of the end of their season. They've done this every year that Clay Helton's been the coach. Through 3 seasons, he still has 2 wins in the month of November, and it's approaching Thanksgiving, so it's not like he's got too many more chances. For the second time in 2 weeks, we've had a player leave the team, so that's fun. They're posting on social media like Instagram, like, "Hey, I really wanted to win, but people in the locker room aren't kind of out for the same reasons." That's great and something you love to see. So I think what's going to end up happening, and they're the master. Georgia Southern through numerous. We're on our 3rd AD in the last like 10 years. We're masters of doing this. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to bring Clay Helton back for 25. He's going to start the season like 0-5, and then they're going to fire him and basically have next year just be like a total waste. And then we're back to square one where we were post Summers, post Lunsford. We just have an entire season that's basically just dead on arrival. And they love doing it. I don't really understand why, but I feel like if FAU can pay Tom Herman $4 million not to coach like they decided to do today, that Georgia Southern could find a way to defer Clay Helton's payments of $1.7 million over time to not totally cripple the athletic department budget.
Sure.
That's just kind of where I am with it.
And again, this is going to be broadly sweeping. Is Georgia Southern the worst bowl eligible team in the conference, if not the country?
No, not in the country, for sure not.
Okay.
In the conference, probably, but that's more of an indictment on the conference than anything else, because I have said for the last couple weeks, I'm like, the only reason they're in this position is because all the other teams have taken a step back. Like, South Alabama is not as good as what we anticipate. They've been, again, 500. They're whatever. Coastal's 500. They're not bowl eligible yet. The bowl eligible teams are like James Madison, who they beat, Marshall, who they beat, and then it's Arkansas State. Okay, I think you could flip a coin between Southern and Arkansas State and come up with a winner. I don't think there's a definitive answer there either way. And Texas State, who I think is better than Georgia Southern at this stage. So, I think that's a little hyperbolic. Okay, but this is just, it's the same thing every year. Like, how many times can you do the exact same thing and expect different results? Like, Clay Helton will win 6 games, and then the minute that happens, goes off of a cliff. He like kicks the leg out from under himself, and now we're just flat on our butt. So nothing's going to change until they find a new head coach. I mean, that's frankly what it is, because, to quote Remember the Titans, attitude reflects leadership. So when everybody is just kind of okay getting run over by a 2-7 Troy team at home, Clay Helton comes out after the game and says, "That was a heck of a football game." And everybody's sitting around going, "I'm sorry, what? We just lost to a 2-7 team, and you're clapping it up?" Like, that's strange to me.
Yeah. Which are you more concerned about? Let's just say over the next 2 weeks, offense or defense, which scares you more from Georgia Southern's perspective?
The offense. And it's more, it's less that I think they're good. It's just more that the defense, I think, has always been a mess in my mind. So for them to continue being a mess is not really a huge shock to me. I mean, they have been bad pretty much all season, except for the JMU game. Inexplicably, they decided to become the 2000 Ravens all of a sudden overnight, and then they went back to the next week. They played Old Dominion the week after and lost by like 1,000. So that has not affected me at all. But offensively, there's a number of different things. Number one, you chose JC French over Dexter Williams. So Dexter Williams is no longer with the team. Okay, so you're stuck in your quarterback choice because you can't pivot now to anybody else. Number two, You're on your second offensive coordinator in 3 years. Okay? So clearly it's not probably the OC at this stage. It's who's hiring the OCs? Where's he getting them from? They're not fits for whatever. They don't adjust. They don't add throughout the season. They don't try to play to strengths and weaknesses. So that's more my issue is like offensively, I didn't expect them to be world beaters, but that's kind of where their bread and butter is supposed to be, and it just hasn't panned out that way. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't really again, I don't think anything's going to change until Clay Helton is out of a job and we're looking elsewhere.
Right. And then from the Troy perspective, I don't think this is the start of a massive turnaround for them. Do they win either of their 2 games to end the season, which are Louisiana and Southern Miss? I think it's. I'll just go ahead. I think they win one. I think they lose one, and I think both of those games are by a fairly wide margin.
Yeah, I think they lose to Louisiana and they beat Southern Miss.
Right.
I will say again, I don't know if this is more of a wow look at Troy or an indictment of Georgia Southern's terrible defense, but Caldwell showed out in this game. He completed almost 82% of his passes, which is insane. He finished 26 of 32. He had all day to throw. They had open throwing lanes. He threw for 288 and 2 scores. Damian Taylor, their running back, had 92 yards. Gerald Green, the former Georgia Southern player, ripped off a big chunk gain in this game. I don't know where his final stat line was, but Devontae Ross had 10 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown. Other than there were 2 drives where the refs basically like led Georgia Southern into the end zone. Like the first drive, Troy stopped Georgia Southern like twice, and they kept getting like defensive holding or a pass interference call or an offsides at a perfect time for them. Georgia Southern, despite like being this game could have easily been way more out of hand than just 8 points.
Sure.
And then a perfect microcosm of this was Georgia Southern gets the ball down 28-20 with like 2 minutes to go. JC French throws an interception, I think on the second play of their last drive. And Georgia Southern, I think, either had all 3 or 2 of their 3 timeouts, and Troy just ran the clock out. Like, Georgia Southern is just not physical on either side of the line of scrimmage. And again, I think that's a reflection of Clay Helton, and his mindset it's weak. It's just being weak is all I guess he's pushing, because he frankly has just not shown to be a very high level coach. And again, they're just gonna kind of go through the motions until they can justify buying him out. But again, I hope they don't spend all of 2025 just 4-year test run. But realistically, that's exactly what's going to happen. But Troy, I will say there was a moment that Troy Parker, the coach, again disappointed me. They were like manhandling Southern in this game, and there was a series. I can't remember what quarter it was in exactly, but we called him early in the season the field goal king, because he was like so willing to just pull up and settle for 3. Early in the game, I think it was their first drive. It was pretty early. They went down and basically had like a 4th and 3, like on the 20-yard line, and they were like, let's kick it, and their guy just shanked the crap out of it. I'm like, he wasn't even close, and it was like close to an extra point. Like that was how close it was. So again, though the things that Southern did well were not things that they were actively doing. It was getting bailed out by the refs, because Troy ended up with like 13 penalties for over 100 yards, and stupid coaching decisions by Troy's coach, like kicking it period, things like that. So those were the things that really kind of kept them in this game. They had no business even being within 8 points of this game.
Okay.
So, with the win, Troy improves to 3-7 and is now 2-4 in the Sun Belt. Georgia Southern drops to 6-4. They are now 4-2 in the conference. This one, I wish I had watched this one. I this was on at this. James Madison beats Old Dominion 35-32. This was a very competitive game. Again, if Georgia Southern Troy hadn't been on at the same time, I would have flipped it over to this one in a heartbeat. Alonzo Barnett played fairly well, 18 of 26, 192 and a score. Young, the running back for Old Dominion, played really well as also 17 carries for 116 and a touchdown. This was just, I was kind of keeping up with it on my like mobile score tracking app. This was just seemed like a track meet. Like these two teams were just going up and down the field the whole day. I mean, they combined for almost 800 yards of offense, or really close. So yeah, there was just no defense played and offense ruled the day basically.
Yeah, the first 7 or 8, I guess. Do we have a word in football for like each team gets a set of drives? I guess you would just call it like a set of drives, right? Pair of drives.
Right.
The first 5 or 6 pairs of drives of this game all started with a score, whether it was from Old Dominion or James Madison or both. But then it really petered out back half of the second into the third, and even into the fourth. Each team only scored once in the fourth quarter. Old Dominion, well, for one, I feel like this is the first game we've seen from Colton Joseph since he's been the starter, where he has come down to earth. Finished 9 for 21, still had, 120 some odd, 190 yards on only 9 completions, and then also ran for 35 yards. So this is the first game we've seen from him back down to earth, and frankly, seeing the offense move fairly well, even without him doing both roles, is something we've not seen from Old Dominion at all this year. They absolutely flubbed this one, though. I thought they had every chance to win this. And ultimate, because like I said, James Madison opened the game with scores on all 3, maybe even 4 first drives of the game. And Old Dominion brought it back. They had all the momentum, and then they fell back down to James Madison's level. For James Madison, I think this is an impressive win. Impressive in quotes, or as impressive as it can get, because they've needed a win. They've had difficulty really establishing any semblance of consistency, and despite this is their 3rd win in a row, but the previous 2 came against Southern Miss and Georgia State, which, congrats, you beat FCS Mississippi and FCS Georgia. Reminder, Kennesaw State is also in Georgia. This was good for James Madison, because at 8-2, they don't feel like an 8-2 team. They don't play like an 8-2 team. I think ever since maybe even predating that Southern game, they've kind of taken a step down in terms of quality. Big thoughts on Old Dominion is they need to start winning games when Colton Joseph isn't the guy, or else he is going to find another job at some Pac school or some, Big 12 school, where they're just going to let him run amok and do whatever he pleases with some skill positions. And he frankly, he may have already made that decision that this is just going to be a 1-year thing for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this early in the season. We were talking about some quarterback, and I can't remember who it was, but you guys asked me, do you think there's a P4 team watching? I think it was South Alabama's quarterback.
Gio Lopez, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of you asked me that, and I was just like, I don't know. He doesn't put up like eye-popping stats, and I don't think a lot of these big time schools are watching tape to see like, oh, this guy's doing really well at South Alabama. Colton Joseph is putting up those eye-popping stats. So I feel like if you are, I don't know, an Oklahoma State or something, and you're like, or hell, he could stay in Virginia and start at Virginia Tech or whatever. Like, one of those teams could just come to him and be like, hey man, we've got like legit NIL funds and we're desperate in need of a quarterback. Like, why don't you just come here? Virginia Tech's kind of already got the ODU to Virginia Tech pipeline set up a little bit with the receiver that they had a couple years ago, ended up at Virginia Tech as well. So I just feel like, yeah, this is almost like an NFL team having a rookie quarterback and being like, this is the time you need to cash in and get some contributors before the cap hit kicks in. But
Yep.
instead of the cap hit and a second contract, it's, oh my God, he's going to be out of here in a couple years, and we're either going to lose him to a bigger school with more funds that can afford to pay him, or we're just going to like waste however 3 or 4 years of him playing here. So that should be their number one concern. Is like, I said this last week, this isn't basketball. You can't just put one guy out on the field and go, all right, man, offense is all you. Like, we don't really have anybody for you to throw to. And, some weeks you're going to have to lead the team in rushing and passing and throw for over 300 yards. He didn't have to do that this game, and they still came close-ish. I mean, the final score was kind of garbage time. They were down 11 points when they scored a touchdown at the end of the game. But this is what we harp on all the time is you can't just put the entire offense on the back of the quarterback and say, hey man, like if you don't win us this game, like we're not going to win. So that's sort of been the real conflict is like, are they going to be able to put guys around him next year, 2 years from now, before another team, like I said, comes calling and says, hey, we actually have guys that can catch passes and block and stuff. Maybe you should come over here.
I'm not confident that they'll be able to do that.
They haven't yet.
they never have. They've not done that since they've been in the Sun Belt. I can't vouch for were they Kusa before. I can't vouch for if they were doing that when they were Conference USA, but I imagine not. Like this team has been very barren for skill players for several years now. They've had a couple, like Ollie Jennings would have a good game every couple weeks. He would be like, hey, I'm here for 110 on 9 catches, but
Blake Watson sets like the Sun Belt single game record against Coastal a couple years ago, and then just falls off the face of the earth. And I think he transferred to like an ACC school or something.
So I'm not confident in Old Dominion's ability to maintain that talent. They've got to decide if they're okay with that, if they're okay with being the school that, if they're okay being the farm system. Because as we're going to talk about in a second, some teams are okay being the farm system. And Old Dominion's got to make that decision like right now, whether that's the situation they're in or not.
Well, the end of the season is going to be very interesting for James Madison and Marshall because they play one another, I think, in the season finale. And that game might single-handedly determine who goes to the Sun Belt title game because they both have a common loss to Southern, and one of those two teams will have the head-to-head tiebreaker over the other. So that might be like a de facto, like who ends up going and representing the East. So we'll have to see how that goes. That'll be really interesting at the end of the year. But yeah, I mean, dude, we've talked about it. Old Dominion has like zero expectations. Like anytime they win, it's like great, and anytime they lose, they're kind of like, eh. Like again, they might finish the season 5-7 with one of the two best quarterbacks in the conference, and it feels like everybody is just kind of like shrug and move on. So I mean, if y'all don't want Colton Joseph, I'll take him. I'm like, seriously, like I'm like, if you are fine winning 5 to 6 games or fewer every single year, send him over my way. You guys could notch out 4 wins with just like a dude back there. Put Grant Wilson back in.
Okay.
I mean, I'm serious. Like, you need to strive for more when you have a quarterback of that caliber. And not just be like, I don't know, man. We're just gonna hang you out to dry and hope it all works out. With that, James Madison's now 8-2 and is 4-2 in the conference. Old Dominion falls to 4-6 and 3-3 in the Sun Belt. Okay, so getting into this next one here, you watched or kept an eye on this one at least. Arkansas State beats Georgia State 27-20. I picked Arkansas State straight up in this game last week. I was just like, I don't really understand why anybody would favor Georgia State unless they were playing Southern Miss. but I'm just like, I don't really get it. Like, what is the deal with both of these teams, really? But like, is Georgia? I read the quotes from Del McGee. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
before this game, and he was kind of like, "Love to have some fan support," and everybody was just kind of like, "I don't know, man, just shut up." Like, I don't really
Yeah.
want to hear it.
So the conversation around Georgia State right now is very much like an outside of football one, pertaining to the quality of facilities, the quality of fans, the just general like
Number of
quality
fans.
number of fans, the general like quality of the program, and whether or not Georgia State, frankly, deserves to be an FBS team.
Wow.
And that's my take on it. Del McGee he said something this past weekend after the game that I'd never seen, or I hadn't seen him do yet, and I didn't see Sean Elliott ever do. And that was just kind of throw up his hands and say, as you mentioned, like, what do you want me to do? I've always thought, and I've been very vocal about this, with when Kirby Smart came out and was like, "Oh man, our fans got to do better." I think it's in very poor taste when players and coaches come out and speak against their fans, because, like, bro, you coach football and you are the highest paid employee at the state university, and you're mad at me. So I think that's typically in poor taste. But what Del McGee also said, which I did think was a legitimate concern, was talking about how Georgia State lags behind not even like Georgia and Georgia Tech, but Georgia Southern and the other teams in the Sun Belt in terms of facilities and in terms of excitement around this team. This was supposed to be their homecoming game, and Georgia State couldn't even sell it out. Are you there, or are you just making that face? Okay, folks, I think we may have lost Brian for a second. So I'll keep going, I guess, on my tirade. Let me actually shoot him a text. 1 second, folks. Anyway, so I may reiterate when he plugs back in. But Del McGee said something I hadn't heard a Sunbelt coach say. You good?
Yeah, sorry about that. Something happened. I don't really understand what the issue was. Like, the video just started circling, and anyway, sorry. Get back to the point you were making. I'm sorry.
No, I was just kind of rambling about the general point that Del McGee brought up some very interesting points. And I would say he didn't really delve into them, but he touched on things that folks, myself included, have, and even your most staunch Georgia State defenders have brought up, in that they're not getting the support from the school. They're not getting the the finances to upgrade things like practice and facilities, and generate any sort of fan interest. I heard a story from this weekend's game where folks are just trying to mill about. Again, this is their homecoming game, and folks are just trying to mill about, talk to folks in different seats, not necessarily move up, or but just, and like security's really hunkering down on that and saying, like, hey, you got to go, like, let me see your ticket. You can't even be chatting here. And so stuff like that does drive away fan interest, which, as you brought up, Del McGee's displeased with. Fans are also going to be displeased with when you have to pull your quarterback, who had already, who's already, your backup playing in place of Christian Valaire. It's Zach Gibson, because you've been displeased with Valaire. You have to then pull Gibson before the end of the second quarter because he's playing so poorly. And Valaire blows a lead, and then has an opportunity to make it all right, send you to overtime, final drive of the game. 3 plays in, it's 1st and 10 around midfield. You're starting to put together one of your best drives of the game. Brian, I have not seen a worse interception in the Sun Belt, maybe in football this year, than this pick that Christian Valaire threw. I am dead serious. If you've not seen the clip, you and
I
all of
haven't.
our listeners, I need you to go see it. It is just absolutely abysmal. He overthrows the guy, I mean, by 3 players worth of height, and then also it's like 5 yards to the left.
Yeah.
It is obscene. Georgia State needs to make a decision. The athletic director, the president or whomever has to make a decision whether or not they want to be an FBS and a Sun Belt team, because there is a real discontent, a valid discontent among both coach and fans of the lack of support for this football team from it allegedly from higher ups. And here's the thing: this could be Del McGee crying because he's not winning games. That's something we are not privy to. But I'm led to believe that. There was a tweet from a backup quarterback.
Can I ask a question just real fast? You can tell me
Yeah.
about the tweet.
No, I'm
But
tirade. Go ahead.
I guess this is rhetorical, but given that McGee coached at Southern and kind of knows what the deal is in the Sun Belt, I guess my question is, and I'm not even trying to play devil's advocate, but like, what did he expect? Did he think that things were just going to turn on a dime the second he got the job? Like, you can't undo a decade plus of apathy in like 6 months. So like, I don't understand what he was expecting to come into.
I'd love to be inside his mind, because while he definitely he had to have known that there was going to be a difference in culture between Southern and Georgia and then State, right?
Mhm.
There's clearly tiers here. Like Georgia football, we both know it. State and Southern fans will forego their own games to go to Athens.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately, and then there's I can't speak to Tech fans, but like Southern fans take football very seriously. Like that is a legitimate part of Georgia Southern's culture as a school and as an athletic program. That is something that they take very seriously. I have to imagine that Dale McGee was anticipating somewhere in that Georgia Southern range. Not he's not stupid. He knew it wasn't going to be Athens. But his complaints based on what he was saying, and again, he's not going to really hammer down on the AD or the president in press conferences, especially after a game. Like that's not going to happen. But he seems to be of the belief that, and I understand this to be a widely held belief, that like they're not even matching Georgia Southern in terms of support from folks above, in terms of finance, in terms of facility ability.
But again, they never have. So I don't understand like what he expect. Did he think it was? I mean, again, he coached at Southern when we went to State when Willie Fritz was the coach when they were playing in the Georgia Dome still.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it was the Georgia Dome, but you could look around and be like, they can't even fill the lower bowl
This
of the
isn't to
Georgia
say
Dome.
that he's shocked. This isn't to say that he's shocked, but he is the first coach to point it out.
Right. I guess my question is, but he's saying it as if like this isn't something I anticipated. And I'm like, why not? Have you not watched any of their games? Like again, look around at the games before you even came on board. When they were 8-4 under Sean Elliott, no one cared. So like I think it's right to be frustrated with like lack of funds and like support in that way, like revenue type support. But I think as the head coach, especially when you've only been there 6 months, I think you need to start winning before you can start complaining about like no one comes to our games. Yeah, probably you're 2-8. You haven't won a Sun Belt game yet. So
Mm-hmm.
like that's probably part of it is again, you guys don't have the history of fan support which is fine. You know, a lot of those teams don't like ULM and stuff like that. Like they don't have these huge fan bases. But also, you can't complain when you're 2-8 and you're in your first season. If you were Sean Elliott and this was year 5 and you had won like the first bowl game in Georgia State history, and then people still weren't showing up, I would be like, yeah, you got it right. Like you earned it, dude. McGee, you don't even have a full recruiting class in the books. Like, what are we talking about? Like that's more what I have an issue with.
Yeah. Just to put a bow on the athletic director side of this story and the non-football side of it, the tweet I was going to mention came from Mikel Calasurdo, who sat behind Darren Granger for several years at Georgia State, and part of he has a couple tweet long thread. Part of it is him just going to bat for Sean Elliott, but the point that I really took away was this quote: "Given the resources we had compared to most of the Fun Belt, we overachieved massively the last 4 years." And I mean that to me is just saying, like, how bad has Georgia State been? They've peaked at 8 wins, and that was their absolute pinnacle, and that was considered an overachievement.
Right.
So again, this is not like here's more money, Del McGee. Here's a better practice facility. But this is the first time anyone from within the program, since I've been following it and been around it, has pointed and said, "Hey, this is not up to standard." Even with our peers, we're not asking for the ceiling; we're asking for our peers. I'm curious to see if that creates any change. I don't know.
Well, okay, let's talk about the other side of this because we've been doing a lot on Georgia State.
My bad.
What did you think of how Jalen Rayner played in this game? Did you think he was kind of back to what we had kind of anticipated he was going to look like preseason? I mean, he ran for 114 yards. So did you think he looked better than what we thought kind of preseason? Do you think he's getting back to that? Or do you think he's still like underachieving for what we kind of predicted?
I mean, he's getting to that spot. He was not asked to do a whole ton here. I mean, only 17 pass attempts, 16 carries, but that's kind of the status quo for him. I saw Arkansas State more so than I maybe ever have. And granted, I'm not a fan of that program. I've been very outspoken in my distaste for Butch Jones and my disbelief in that program. So I tend not to watch their games. I'll concede that. But I saw them rely on the run more than I've ever seen them. And at the very least, what that means is that opens up Jalen Rayner more as a runner because that's his greatest asset. He's a fine quarterback that can throw the ball well, but he is superhuman in how he runs at times. And by adding more carries to the overall run game that are outside of Rayner, it makes him even more effective. And like I said, that's just something I've not seen out of Arkansas State up to this point, which gives me hope for them in that, like, now, if you consider this, they had something like 40 some odd carries. If you continue that trend, you're going to allow Jalen Rayner to utilize his best asset, which is his legs, more efficiently and in situations where you need him to, instead of just kind of on 1st and 10.
Right. All right. Well, a good comeback win, I guess, for Arkansas State. Then 6-4 now this season, 4-2 in Sunbelt play. Georgia State drops to 2-8 and is 0-6 in the conference. Again, would have been nice to have the Louisiana guy here for this, but South Alabama beats Louisiana 24-22. South Alabama was up 24-3 at half. And this game was pretty much a wrap. Like, I didn't watch a lot of this game because frankly, the Southern Troy game took forever to get through. So like, it was just like, I didn't really have an opportunity. But UL didn't lose the turnover battle. They just got I guess just got down early and just couldn't recover. Gio Lopez had those 2 touchdown runs in the first and second quarter. UL couldn't, it seemed like, string together offense. They got a field goal from Almendaris in the second quarter, but the rest of it was just defensively. I have brought up each week that their defense gives me real pause. And if you look at the scoring drives for South Alabama, you'll see why. First scoring drive, 74 yards on 9 plays. Second one, 90 yards on 5 plays. That's alarming. 90 yards on 5 plays. And then the third touchdown drive before half was 10 plays, 75 yards again. So, again, defensively, it was like last week was the perfect storm of like they played complementary football on both sides against Arkansas State. Offense helped out the defense. Defense would hold them. Offense would go and score. And this is like the nightmare scenario of kind of what they've been doing all year, which is they seem to be reacting to what the other team is doing rather than trying to go out and put their foot on the gas from the jump. And you can't always just flip the switch. Like, you can't play like that if you're a good team. And we anticipate that the Cajuns are one of the really, like you said, there's a big gap between them and Marshall at number 2. So I don't know. I mean, they had to pull Wooldridge out. Fields ended up scoring the 2 touchdowns for Louisiana. And so, yeah, I frankly, I just don't know. Like, I think that this is a one-off, but something in the back of my mind has almost been like the chickens have come home to roost a little bit, where again, the offense hasn't been, hey, let's go out and kill the other team early and jump on them. And the defense has been reluctant to tackle guys. And I think that kind of all came to a head in this one.
Yeah. For one, we won't know whether or not like these are real issues for Louisiana until the conference championship, because they end the season against Troy and UL Monroe. Troy, we anticipate that to be a cakewalk. UL Monroe, I would imagine Matt no longer feels, as he said several weeks ago around, when UL Monroe was looking like the best team in the conference, he said that he was most scared of Monroe as he's been in maybe the past 10 years or some odd. I'd imagine he no longer feels that way.
I think he's always a little hesitant to play them. I don't think that I remember doing the podcast with him for like Underdog Dynasty, and like even on their worst years, he would always be like, this could be a field goal game. Like, we just truly have. I mean, he one year he took me through like the series history, and Louisiana ended up crushing ULM that year, but it was just kind of like all these games are kind of really close, and like you can say ULM plays up in these games, you could say UL plays down, but either way they usually end up being close. I wouldn't say that he still thinks it's a cakewalk, even with kind of the Warhawks backslide.
Sure,
but yeah.
That point aside, we won't know. Like, even if that ULM game is a tight game, it's reasonable to posit that it would be a close game because of funkiness and not necessarily because of team ability. So we won't know if these are like legitimate concerns for Louisiana until they play Marshall, or this is just like Marshall's loss to Southern, your fluke conference loss. Something again, I could have done my research better in preparing for this, because this was initially going to be posed as a question to Matt, but I probably should have I should have prepared the answer. They took 2 field goals from 5 and 8 yards, and so the Louisiana scored on its 4 final drives of the game, and 2 of those were a 4th and 5 from the 5 and a 4th and 8 or from the 8. I am very, very curious to know if that's the trend, if that's just what DeSormo does, or if that was very poor decision-making at that point in the game. Because by the time UL Monroe had scored, or I'm sorry, Louisiana had scored its field goal, the first one, which came from the 8-yard line, South Al was already up 24-3.
24-3. Yeah.
So what are you doing? Because you've turned a possession game into a 3 possession game. Congratulations. There was just simply not enough, because that was in the third quarter as well, and that was fairly into the third quarter. I don't think that was like the first drive of the third. So, like, do you anticipate scoring 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter? Is that your plan? Is that what you anticipate? Because that felt like a major lapse in judgment to me. Is, first of all, ever kicking a field goal from that close,
Down
especially
21.
when you're down 21 like that.
That always really bothers me. And like, it's easy to say when you're on the internet and not like on the sideline, like, hey, I would have went for it there. But like you said, what do you gain by cutting a 24-3 lead or 24-3 deficit to 24-6? Like, what does that do for you? You can't come back and score touchdown 2-point conversion twice. You're still down 2, even if you nail that. So, and I mean, I've given Parker, the head coach for Troy, a bunch of grief for this, even on this exact episode, for this reason. Yep. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to win games? Or it's one thing when you're like the Steelers-Ravens game yesterday, like, points were at an absolute premium. Like, you could not sit there and say, hey, the Steelers need to go for it on fourth down here. Like, the final score of that game was like 18-17 or whatever. 19-7, 19-18, whatever it was. In this game, when you're down 3 scores, you cannot afford to just say, let's trot the kicker out from the 2-yard line or whatever it was. Like, that just seems like coaching malpractice to me, because it's like, are you trying to win the game, or are you trying to cover the spread? Because you're not going to do either. So you might as well go ahead and put the second one out of your mind, because you guys were touchdown favorites coming into this one. Right. So I never really understand it. Like, again, maybe there was something in the press conference after the game that alluded to that. I would have liked to have. I think Matt kind of would have been on our side a little bit of like, what are you doing? But unfortunately, we won't know. But yeah, I truly never understand those decisions. Like, you need points. We've established this. So kicking it here does not help you in any way, shape, or form. So why would you trot the kicker out?
I couldn't tell you.
It's like those games where like a team is getting shellacked by an SEC school, and they're like, hey, it's 66-0. Let's get the kicker out there and kick a field goal so we don't get shut out. And I'm like, who does this benefit? Like, no one's going to care on your resume if it's 66-3 or 66-0. No one's going to be like, well, at least you got 3. Like, so you might as well go ahead and put that out of your mind right there. But yeah, disappointing performance for Louisiana. I'm sure Matt would agree. But South Alabama, corrected their brain fart from a week ago, where they just basically handed Georgia Southern the game in the fourth quarter, and got outscored 20-0 in that quarter. South Alabama improves to 5-5 this season and is now 4-2 in the Sun Belt. Louisiana drops to 8-2 and is now 5-1. Getting to this last one here, we don't have to talk a lot about this. Texas State just runs through Southern Miss. It's 58-3. They've already fired Will Hall. This seems like, I don't know how many guys are on a roster, 85. This seems like 85 guys that just want to go home and want to be done with it. And this is like the Street Fighter meme, like, go home and be a family man. Like, this is not anything. You can't build anything off of this. You don't know who your next head coach is. You have no consistency on either side of the ball. You don't have a quarterback. You don't, Rodemaker or Ethan Crawford, doesn't matter. So there's nothing to glean from any of these Southern Miss teams they've been fielding lately.
How disappointed are you? Because I'll concede that I anticipated Tate Rodemaker to make an impact on this team. I don't believe that I ever thought that he was going to turn this team around. But Southern Miss, is kind of in a situation that is the opposite, or was recently in the situation opposite to Old Dominion, in which they had at least a weapon, that being Frank Gore, and all they needed was like a guy to throw the ball. And they couldn't find that. Granted, Frank Gore has graduated, Tate Rodemaker, and he never overlapped at Southern Miss. But I anticipated Rodemaker, if only because he was of good enough quality to have played in some capacity at Florida State, to make an impact on this team. And he has simply not. He has fumbled as bad as every Wilkie, or if I can't even start to begin to name Southern Miss quarterbacks
Ryan
because
Berger.
they each
Or
play.
that was
That's App
sorry, that was
State.
App. Yeah.
Billy Wiles. Like
Wiles.
these are guys that like play 2 games and then I don't know, fall off the face of the
Disappear to the shadow realm, basically.
Yeah. I'm dying. There cannot be a team that is started or has had more players attempt to pass in the past 3 years than Southern Miss. That feels impossible. It's simply impossible. And Tate Rodemaker, thanks for coming and trying. He's gonna, go into the annals of history in the same regard as just like, really, you couldn't even get over 52%.
Well,
you can go 9 for 14 one game.
I don't know if you remember me saying this, but I said on the preview show, you guys were like, well, Tate Rodemaker's coming over from Florida State. And I was like, I didn't really see a lot out of him at Florida State. And then we kind of had the discussion back and forth, like, would being mid at a P4 school like Florida State contribute to being better at a G5 school? And the answer is like, not really. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have high expectations for him. I mean, he was not good last year at Florida State. Like, I know they finished the season undefeated. I can't remember, was he the guy that started the ACC title game and got concussed and wouldn't have been available for the playoff, or was he the guy that played in the bowl game where they got murdered? I can't remember.
I don't think
it was one of the two. They had they had 3 quarterbacks. Travis was their starter. He got hurt and was out for the year. Then one of Rodemaker and another guy. Rodemaker, I think, played the Florida game in the ACC championship and got concussed and wouldn't have been available to play in the playoff anyway, but he wasn't really very good in either of those games. The defense kind of won them those games. So I don't know. I don't think there's a lot you can expect when a guy goes to Southern Miss, because frankly, they just don't have contributors at any position, at any level. And their coach was clearly a dead man walking before the season even started. But I just didn't have high expectations for him, period. Like, I watched him play in those games and I was like, you could replace him with probably the majority of the Sun Belt quarterbacks that were in the conference last year and probably get roughly the same results at Florida State. And that should tell you pretty much all you need to know.
Teams historically, I forget. Oh gosh, I forget. There's a coach that was fired earlier this year, non-Sun Belt, and there was just a lot of talk about the juice a team gets, and how after a coach is fired and how that can, secure jobs for interims. Safe to say that's not happening at Southern Miss. And we kind of had this discussion, like, I wouldn't say last year as they were looking for a coach, but before the Bowden hire for ULM, where it was just like, who on earth would want this job?
Yeah.
Like, who?
I think it would have to be somebody who wants to, obviously shape a team. And, if you want an FBS paycheck coming up from the FCS level, like, that's one thing. Like, that makes sense. You can we talked earlier this season about what type of coaching archetype you would want to kind of be elevated. And I think we all, or at least I put the case out there, that I want a head coach that can bring an entire staff over and like maybe some players from their previous stop. but I want someone. If I'm looking at for Southern Miss's next head coach, I'm looking for an FCS coach with head coaching experience that has a good FCS team currently, who can maybe even bring some talent from that school as well as their staff, the majority of their staff. And that's what you don't get when you are some of these other teams where you're like, hey, I'm going to hire a Gerard Parker. I'm going to hire a Tim Beck, because those guys are now like, well, I can't just poach the defensive coordinator from NC State or Notre Dame. So what are we gonna do on that side of the ball? And then it turns out, oh, I actually don't have as many guys lined up to want to coach defensive coordinator in the Sun Belt as I thought I did. So
Right.
I think you have to have someone who's willing to kind of embrace the challenge the same way that like Bryant Vincent, for all, for the backsliding that they've done, he's basically been, still in my estimation, like one of the coach of the year candidates, just because of what did we expect ULM to look like this season? What did they look like through 6 games with no discernible quarterback? So I think you need to find somebody like that who is willing to come in and just put their imprint on the team and build a culture. Like as far as I know, like Southern Miss doesn't have like a strong, built-in kind of culture like they did for a while. And then I think Ellis Johnson kind of, when he came in for that one season where they went 0-12, just kind of cleared all of that out from what I remember. And I just feel like they've kind of been floating, trying to decide kind of what to do with the program's future. So I think you need to find somebody who's got a strong footprint, either offensively or defensively, bring that guy in from the FCS level, make sure he can bring an entire staff over and maybe some players, and kind of let them build from there, because the Will Hall era clearly was an absolute abject failure, and they don't have, again, a lot of these other teams get bumped when they fire their head coach and are like, hey, we get at least a one game, like, hey, our team's not dead. There's just nothing here. Like there's nothing to grab onto. So I think you have to find someone who's willing to just be like, I'm going to have to take this FBS program up from like, the foundation of a house, and we just have to start over. So I guess that's kind of what you got to look at. But with that, Texas State is now 6-4 and is 4-2 in the conference. Southern Miss drops to 1-9 and is 0-6 in the Sun Belt. Before we get to our week 13 games picks, I want to remind everybody, make sure you're following us on X. We are at Warm Weather Fans. Check out our YouTube page. We put not only these streams go up on the page, but also we have bonus content that's only available on the page. So you can see the link here in the description at the bottom, youtube.com/@warmweatherfans. Please make sure that you've gone and subscribed to that as well. We are also available on Spotify, Apple, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. So, if you can't make a stream, or, don't have time to watch video, you can always find us on your podcatcher of choice. All right. So week 13, let's get into it. Kind of a late start for, frankly, the Sun Belt games. Like we don't have a noon game this week. First game's at 2:30. ESPN Plus, James Madison is traveling to Boone to take on, frankly, an App State team that I don't know if they've quit or if they just don't have the horses. But they've looked really bad. And like, I kind of thought, hey, maybe you could build off the ODU win a couple weeks ago, and they haven't. So James Madison is a 7-point road favorite, over under 60.5. Give me James Madison. Like App just seems like they're also in the Southern Miss boat a little bit, where they're just kind of ready for this to be done this year.
Yeah. I like that pick. Give me the over here, 60.5. James Madison has shown it can put up points. And I've been very underwhelmed by the App State defense this season. So give me the over.
The other thing too, Matt and I touched on this last week, but because the Liberty game was canceled, App is only going to play 11 games this year. So if they don't win this game and at Southern in the finale, they won't make a bowl game. They will finish the season below 500 because they won't have 12 games played.
That
So
wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you are, if you
an App
feel
State fan,
unrest. Yeah, if you feel unrest towards Sean Clark or Sean Elliott, Sean Clark,
Sean Clark.
or Sean Clark.
It's going to be interesting to see what they do with him because
Mm-hmm.
it seems like everybody's pretty much done with him, but I don't know how much they're going to pin the Hurricane stuff on this season, but I frankly don't think that the two are really connected all that much.
No.
Like it was very unfortunate, and obviously we felt bad for a lot of the people in that area, but I don't think that connected meaningfully to the way that this team has underperformed. Like I said, the backslide for them started in that South Alabama game, like the Thursday before all that went down. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't really, and they were losing by a ton. All right, 3 o'clock. We've got UL Monroe traveling to Jonesboro to take on Arkansas State. Arkansas State is a 3-point favorite. Over under is 52.5. Give me the under in this one. I think UL Monroe obviously really struggles to score points with their quarterback situation that we talked about. And frankly, Arkansas State's not really been lighting up the scoreboard either. And I still think UL Monroe's got some good defensive pieces. So I could see the final score of this one being like 17-14 or something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Give me ULM here. I to cover and to win straight up. I think. What are you laughing at?
That you just don't. I was like, is this how much you don't like Arkansas State? That you're just like,
No,
give me a ULM team that's on a backslide in the second half
no,
of the
they're on a
season.
backslide, but they're on a backslide against teams that are, I think, better than Arkansas State. I mean
Okay.
Marshall, Texas State, and then Auburn, right?
Mm-hmm.
All teams I would feel fairly comfortable saying are better than Arkansas State. I think there's an absolute world where ULM ends the season with like 5 or 6 losses and miss the bowl game despite starting 5-1. But I think they clinch a bowl game here against Arkansas State.
Well, this would be the week to do it because I think taking it down to the Louisiana game is very, very dicey considering Louisiana's now had their one kind of free check the box conference loss off.
Mm-hmm.
And not that anybody in the West is really, I mean, technically South Alabama is still there. Like if if South Alabama wins out and Louisiana slips up against, either Troy and or ULM in the finale, South Alabama could take their spot in the conference title game representing the West because they're
Mm-hmm.
4-2 in the conference. So I guess that potential is still there. They really need to like shape up. So 3 o'clock, another ESPN Plus game. We got South Alabama traveling to take on Southern Miss in Hattiesburg. South Alabama is a 22.5-point favorite. Over under is 55.5. It's a lot of points, but give me South Alabama. If there's one thing that Southern Miss is doing, it's letting other teams cover the spread against them.
Yeah. And we've seen South Al lay the hammer. Obviously, they did so against Northwestern State when they put up like 87 points. But even against App the following week, they won by over 30. They beat Monroe by 30 some odd points. So South Al, the Jags don't hesitate to lay the hammer down in games that they're winning.
Mm-hmm.
I hate 22.5. That is such a stupid number to put on a game, but give it to me.
Texas State covered, I think, 26.5, zero problem last week against Southern Miss. So that's the only thing. I was hesitant because I thought that was a huge number. And again, 58-3. And you're like, I actually dumbly picked the under because I thought, well, Texas State's finally going to take their foot off the gas, right? Wrong. All right. Another 3:30, a 3:30 kick. ESPN Plus. Georgia Southern. Talk about a backslide. Is traveling to Conway to take on Coastal Carolina on the surf turf. Coastal Carolina is a 2-point home favorite. Over under 56.5. Give me Coastal Carolina -2 all day. This is the beginning. Like last week, it was the signal that we are approaching. It's like being on a subway. It's the Clay Helton Express. You've now reached your stop. Get off. So
Mhm.
like here's where it all starts to fall apart. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to um, Coastal and App to end the season, to be quite frank, because this is how it happens. It's not a gradual decline, it's a rapid shot to the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah. If this team were coached by anybody else, I think I would take Southern, because they're still in the hunt for the with the win against Marshall, or I'm sorry, the loss to Marshall, but the win over James Madison, they're still like kind of in the hunt for the East here. I could really see like this Southern team putting on the gas, but Clay Helton has burnt this team before, going to continue burning this team until he's fired. Give me Coastal here.
All right. 5 o'clock kick here. Troy is traveling to Lafayette to take on Louisiana. Louisiana's 11-point home favorite. Over unders 53.5. I'm gonna take Troy plus 11. This is gonna be like a show me game for Louisiana. Show me that last week was a total fluke and that you guys can go back to. Well, okay, so this is the thing too. Pre Arkansas State, they were not beating teams by like more than 10 points on a regular basis.
Right.
Like even teams that you'd be like, wow, they're going to outclass Southern Miss. That wasn't like a huge blowout. They beat App in a really ugly game that was closer than it had any reason to be. So I think that one of two things happens. Either Louisiana goes back to the playbook of we're going to beat this team by 10 points and everybody's going to be like, wow, it's a double-digit dominant win, but it's really not. Or Troy has figured some things out. Their offensive line's finally healthy. Caldwell has come along as of late. We'll see which one of those things is true.
Yeah. I think I still like Louisiana here, even with the spread. Troy's put together 2 wins in a row against fairly unimpressive Coastal and Georgia Southern teams. And I think after the loss, like, I don't anticipate Louisiana to lose another game this season. At least, barring a bowl game or, barring, God forbid, some miracle CFP nonsense.
I think last week put that out of the cards.
Oh yeah.
I don't think you can spin it now.
No. But I don't believe that last week for either of these teams was a true reflection of these teams. I don't believe that Troy is in its current state capable of winning 3 in a row, and I don't think Louisiana in its current state is capable of losing 2 in a row. So give me Louisiana.
Okay. 7 o'clock kick, ESPN Plus. Georgia State is traveling to San Marcos to take on the Bobcats of Texas State. Texas State is a 20-point home favorite. Over unders 57.5. Give me Texas State. Texas State is one of those teams. If they win, they cover, and it's almost like a rule of thumb. Like if they don't cover, it's usually because they found a way to lose. But Georgia State is so untalented. This has got to be like a conflict of interest for you almost. Like you're like, I keep up with Georgia State, but I picked Texas State to make the playoff to start the season, and it's like Texas State is going to hammer Georgia State. Like there's just kind of no way around it.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's true. I think 20 is definitely a lot. Like a 21-point win for Texas State is certainly feasible, and not completely out of the question. I wouldn't even say it's out of the question a little bit. I think that's completely reasonable. But that won't be my pick because 57.5 is way too low for this game's over under, in my opinion. As you said, when Texas State wins, they hammer teams. But it's not because they're putting up 35 and holding the other team to 3. It's because they're putting up 58 and letting the other team score 2 or 3 touchdowns. Georgia State has had no issue. I won't say no issue, but has had little issues scoring like 21 points a game this year. It's just been anything after that seems at times impossible to get, impossible to reach. So give me the over here. I think there are a ton of points scored in this game.
So I just want to read off the margin of victory for each of Texas State's 6 wins so far this year. And this is
Mhm.
what I'm talking about covering. Okay, so you had the season opening win against Lamar. That seemed fairly out of character. It was 34-27. Again, they've I feel like they've improved since then on offense and maybe regressed on defense since
Mhm.
that. Okay, they beat UTSA 49-10. They beat Arkansas State 41-9. They beat ULM 38-17 and Southern Miss 58-3. Georgia State feels more in line with like the Southern Miss Arkansas State type of breed where I just feel like Texas State is going to get up on them and just keep hammering them because they don't take their foot off the gas when it comes time
Mhm.
to really put the hammer down. So I think that's kind of the way that one ends up. And again, so 7:30 we have a really interesting game on ESPNU. Marshall is traveling to Norfolk to take on Old Dominion. Old Dominion is a 2-point home favorite. Over unders 52.5. I'm taking Marshall. Like I still think Marshall is the second best team in the Sun Belt, and until they don't, the I can't emphasize enough how Georgia Southern the loss to them was such a fluke that
Mhm.
it just won't happen again. They are in the driver's seat. They have everything to play for. I don't think they overlook Old Dominion in this game. And then I believe the finale they play JMU, right? So they have to win both of these. So I just think Marshall has the mindset of we have everything to play for, and that's the exact opposite of Georgia Southern, where it's like we have everything to play for. Let's just pack it in for the season. So
Mhm.
I think Marshall wins this game straight up.
I yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. We've said really nothing but negative things about Old Dominion kind of all year outside of Colton Joseph. And I anticipate that to continue. Marshall, again, I'm hesitant to say that they absolutely outclass the Monarchs, uh, but they are without question a more consistent and more reliable team. And there's like a 50-50 shot Old Dominion puts up 10 points in the entire game, right?
Mhm.
So give me Marshall.
It feels like there is there's a 25% chance that Old Dominion scores 10 or fewer, and there's also a 25% chance that they put 45 on the board. And there's
Yeah.
like it could really go either way with them. You truly don't know, like, is Colton Joseph really going to be cooking? But I'm just of the mindset like I don't think Colton Joseph and Braylon Braxton are that far apart in the
Hmm.
quarterback department, which makes me think that Marshall will know exactly how to defend him because I think Braxton plays in a very similar fashion. So keep him contained, force him to throw the ball from the pocket, make it really tough on, frankly, outside of Page, not a great group of pass
Hmm.
catchers. And just double one guy and stop the run is pretty much all how it goes because they don't do a whole lot other than that. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's pretty
Um,
straightforward.
all right, Zeke, as we wrap up here, we've got 97 people watching. We appreciate everybody who tuned in on either X or at YouTube. Zeke, let everybody know where they can find you on socials, and I'll do the same, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah. On the screen, you can see, you can find me on X, on Twitter at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo. About a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I pulled the trigger. I'm paying $8 a month. I am verified. But here's the thing, they're letting me write community notes now. I told you this a couple of weeks ago. They're letting me write community notes, and for that, I'm willing to pay $8 a month.
I might need to send Elon a DM and be like, "Hey, man, maybe revoke this. Don't maybe this wasn't the best idea." Uh, No, I'm just playing. So as you can see on my side as well, you can find me on X at Watch the Stone. We appreciate again everybody that tuned in, everybody that watched. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back to do this next week. We want to make broadcasting actually on Sunday nights now our kind of standing appointment. So if you guys aren't tuned into SNF Sunday Night Football that night necessarily, come on to our YouTube page, come on to our X page, join us. We'll be talking about Sunbelt football each Sunday